My name is Dan Siegel. My university is UCLA, and my specialty is I'm a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I'm at the Mindsight Institute, which is not a part of UCLA. So in terms of my affiliation, that's really where I work. I'm also a clinical faculty member at UCLA. And I run, with Sue Smalley, the research program called the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. So that's just the formal stuff. Yeah. So, the interest in mindfulness at a university, I think, comes from the findings inspired by mindfulness practice and then researched by people like John Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson, that adults who focus their attention in a mindful way in a training period of about 8 weeks could actually change the way their brain functioned. That finding, along with some amazing discoveries in neuroscience that the brain continues to change throughout the lifespan, not just in childhood, really, I think, got people very interested in how to use the mind to change the structure and function of the brain. So that's for the use in adults. For children, we're very interested in seeing if education can develop parts of the brain that develop early on, called the prefrontal areas, the part just behind the forehead, that help give you the capacity, for example, to pause before you act or to have empathy for others. And at this point, education, for the most part, focusing on reading, writing, arithmetic, is not helping the prefrontal cortex develop directly. We need to add a fourth R, what you can call the fourth R of reflection. And reflective skills allow a child to develop these prefrontal abilities, and so that they can really develop what are called executive functions. We've done a pilot study to show that if you can teach mindfulness to teenagers and adults with attention deficit issues, you actually can improve their attention functioning even more than you do with medications. So this is the idea of meditation, not medication. But combined together, we feel that even medications plus mind training, that is, mindful awareness practices like yoga or meditation, would help develop these prefrontal circuits in the brain that seem not to function too well in attention deficit problems. Other areas at UCLA, other people have been studying issues like David Cresswell has studied mindful awareness traits and has shown, in fact, that people with mindful awareness traits, this capacity, for example, to be non-judgmental, to not be reactive, to be very aware of what's going on, those are some of the traits, those individuals can actually use their brain in certain ways differently to calm a very reactive, lower emotional center of the brain, whereas people who are not mindful don't have that skill. And there's an example of using naming, where you name an emotion to tame the internal world. That's a very useful ability. So if a child, for example, is feeling angry, if they've developed mindfulness and they say, "I'm angry," that can help calm the whole state down. But if they haven't had mindfulness training, it won't necessarily help them. The pilot study that was done showed that, in fact, kids with more challenges to their executive functions got much more improvement than kids who didn't have difficulties. Now, we need to do a follow-up study to see what exactly that means, larger sample, and do more controlled examples of, kids who were like that, not like that, and what were the essential components that helped. But we did, in fact, in this pilot study with inner kids, with Susan Kaiser Greenland's work, show that the kids with more challenging situations got better. It's not that surprising when you think that you're really trying to support the development of a part of the brain that, if it's challenged, will be eager to develop, if you will. And if that brain is already pretty well developed, well, there's not much more to add. One way of understanding how mindfulness works is by looking into the circuitry of the brain. And so we all have actually a handy model of the brain, which is actually our hand. So if you take your hand and fold your thumb into the middle of your palm and your fingers over, this would be an example of a brain where the person's eyes are here, the top of their head is here, their brain is connected to the body itself at the spinal cord, which is represented in your wrist. The way the brain is composed, its architecture, helps us understand how mindfulness works. If you lift your fingers up and lift your thumb up, we go to the first part of the brain in the skull, which is here called the brainstem. And this is where you have the regulation of the body, and where you also have the fight, flight, and freeze response that are created. This area of the brainstem, very primitive area, works together with the next area that's on top of it called the limbic area, and this is represented by the thumb. The limbic area helps generate our emotions. There are parts of it that help us feel our feelings. We also distinguish different aspects of memory, and in particular, this limbic area responds to our relationships. Okay, now this limbic area and brainstem area, they work together. And because these are below the next area of the brain, the cortex, we call them subcortical. A lot of our impulses, our automatic behaviors, our just innate learned reactions to things, our instincts, are driven by these subcortical areas, including information that comes up from the body itself. Your heart pounding, your intestines churning, feed up to the limbic area in the brainstem and get you all revved up. So that's a kind of loop that creates what we call our emotional state. The cortex developed when we became mammals also, as the limbic area did, but the front part of this cortex, from your second to last knuckles down to your fingernails, the front part developed when we became primates, and this part where your fingernails are is called the prefrontal cortex because it's the frontmost part of the frontal lobe. This is the part that's most developed in humans. And it's this part that gives us the ability to pause before acting on an impulse. And the way it works is there are fibers that come down from this middle prefrontal area that actually calm down the irritable limbic area or brainstem area. Literally, this prefrontal region regulates the lower subcortical, limbic, brainstem, and even bodily areas. So, in many ways, what we think happens is mindful awareness practice creates a state of activation in that moment that in a way harnesses the power of this prefrontal area in that moment. As you repeatedly practice something, that state can become a trait because neurons which are firing together wire together. So with the strengthening of this prefrontal area, what happens is, for example, if a child is angry and the brainstem is activating a fight response, the limbic area works with that to develop a feeling of fear. There's a sense of betrayal by what happens. So you're really angry, you're burning up, your heart is pounding, and everything is going to get you to fight, to get a knife, to get a gun, to hit someone, to do something really violent. But your prefrontal cortex has you pause. And the very parts of the brain that allow you to pause are also the same part of the brain, this middle prefrontal area, that allows you to have insight into what's going on. My heart's pounding, I'm really angry. Empathy for someone else. Maybe that guy didn't mean it, or maybe he's doing the best he can. And then even a sense of morality. So when we develop the middle prefrontal areas, we actually can not only pause, but we can think of the larger social good and enact a behavior that's better for everyone. And that's where mindfulness really alters things like bullying, like violent acts of aggression. And it's where mindfulness can change the world, literally, one person, one relationship at a time. It is possible that if, let's say, I've practiced mindfulness for a year, or 8 weeks, or whatever I've done, that I've learned a different way of actually living in the world. So you may not notice, but I may be practicing mindfulness right now. Right? So I'm not doing a formal sitting, and no one's teased that apart yet. You know, if you've become a way of living mindfully, is that actually something that keeps on perpetuating the positive benefits of mindfulness? And my gut feeling is, in fact, that that's true. That even just giving kids a limited exposure to mindfulness and reminders to do it, even if they don't do a regular practice, they'll have incorporated that into their lives, and they'll say things like, I need to watch my breathing, or I know there's an alternative way, or why can't I do this mindfully? You know, especially with children who soak up things like a sponge, giving them this tool, I think, can change the direction of their development for the rest of their lives. We do work in preschools because there's evidence to suggest that the ability to have executive functions, the regulation of attention, gets fairly well matured at age 7. That's pretty young. So why not teach some kids tools of strengthening their capacity to focus attention long before they're 7? So that's why we've gone into preschools. As those circuits, those prefrontal circuits mature, you have the opportunity to find the way that even as kids get older, after 7, you can still help them improve. After all, we've done a study on adolescents and adults. So the brain continues to change throughout the lifespan. The studies on mindfulness have mostly been done on adults. And there you see that adults can change after an 8-week program. So much so you can see shifts in the brain where the brain gets into what's called an approach state rather than a withdrawal state, a sign of resilience. They can really stay with things that are even difficult. You can show that adults have all sorts of capacities to discern or to tell what's going on in their inner world when people who haven't had the training can't do that. So even an 8-week training can have interesting and important effects on the brain of adults. There's no reason to think it wouldn't be useful also for kids, even after the age of 7, when their executive functions have matured to a certain extent. It helps kids become kinder to themselves, kinder to each other. It helps them be more empathic. It can help them have more regulation of their emotions, so they're more even keel. It helps kids, even if you see the Castle work and interpret that work on social and emotional intelligence, and interpret that as a way of becoming more internally focused on oneself and others. That work on the Castle program shows that kids also do better academically. So if we extend their important work to the general notion of being reflective and think of that as a form of mindfulness, then you could say that that specific kind of work, the social emotional intelligence work, promotes academic excellence as well. The Castle work is the Consortium for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It's a program based out of Illinois that has been studied, an intervention program to teach kids to be aware of their emotional state, how to modulate their internal state, how to figure out how to problem solve, how to be aware of other people's emotions, and how to help communicate with those emotions more effectively. Those are the 5 basic things, essentially, that Castle does. They've studied their intervention program in about 200 schools. They don't use the word mindfulness, but their techniques are very much, I think, a fundamental way that kids look internally, what you might call internal education, or what I call the 4th R, basically reflective skills. These ways of knowing the internal world and how to change it, allow you to have mindsight, to see and change the mind. And these are basically what we learn when we learn mindfulness. Some people don't take to certain techniques and they take to others. For example, some people don't really like focusing on their breath, and they prefer a movement like yoga. Some people like something that's more dynamic like Tai Chi. So when people don't respond, it doesn't mean mindfulness isn't good for them. It may mean that particular mindful awareness practice just didn't suit their physiology or their temperament or whatever. So I think we can say that mindfulness could be helpful to everyone. It's just which way are they going to learn it? So that's for the generality of it. In terms of the consistency of the results, mindfulness needs to be taught by people who are themselves practicing mindfulness. I think that's what a lot of experts are suggesting, and some of the research in the work on applying it, let's say, for people who are depressed and preventing depression, has shown that you really need to have the actual clinician practicing mindfulness. So it would be an interesting study to do that I think is being carried out now by the Garrison Institute to see the difference between mindfulness teaching from a mindfulness teacher versus teaching mindfulness techniques to a teacher who's never learned mindfulness, and whether that makes a difference for the students. The question of taking time in a busy school day to teach kids reflective skills, mindfulness skills, the ability to look at the inner world, all these being names for the same experience, those skills actually can help kids academically. So while it may take a little bit of time, it actually can increase the efficiency at which kids learn and can improve their social skills, their social relationships, their emotional skills, their ability to be in a relationship with their own inner world. So in all those ways, while it takes clock time, it actually is worth every second of that. In a way, what mindfulness education does is it trains the prefrontal cortex that helps keep the whole system in balance and helps you have empathic relationships, so that we're actually teaching something that isn't taught in any other part of the curriculum. You can almost argue that mindfulness ought to be the first basic skill that's taught, so that all the rest follows after that. Regarding the question of negative effects, one of the things that being mindful and being taught mindfulness skills does is get kids in touch with their inner world. So one of the programs that I consult to has found that kids become more aware of their inner memories and emotions. So schools have to be prepared that if a child is being mistreated at home, if a child's had frightening experiences, they may get more in touch with the memories and feelings of those experiences and bring them up in classrooms. And teachers may feel, as one teacher said to me, that a Pandora's box was opened up. My feeling about it is that as a community of caring adults, we need to provide children who spend so many hours in schools with an opportunity to know themselves. And in the short run, there may be things teachers have to do to get support for that child, bring the family in, be helpful in whatever ways they can. In the medium run and long run, it's all good. Because if a child has something going on inside of herself that she's never talked about, it's better that she talk about it then rather than 10 years later when she'll use up huge amount of personal resources, social resources, and create unbelievable pain in the next generation if she isn't given the opportunity to work on that. So in the big picture, mindfulness can help even if it brings up emotions that a child feels they're not ready to deal with. You know, if all schools took mindfulness on as a basic skill to teach all children, there's a potential for there to be a huge shift in how the next generation brings their minds, their hearts, their whole relational abilities to be connected with each other into the world. And so this isn't just about stress reduction, or certainly not just about relaxation, which mindfulness is not. Mindfulness is really a lifelong skill that can change the individual's life for the better, relationships that child has in his or her life for the better, and in that way, one relationship at a time, improve the world. You know, I've heard stories of kids who come home from school having learned a mindful awareness practice like meditation or yoga, who, when their parents are getting in a tense moment of friction, will ask the parents to do a focusing on their breath or stretch. And I think children can be our best teachers. They can teach us not only by example, but literally teaching us the skills that they're learning. And my experience as a child psychiatrist has been that when kids in my practice are learning mindfulness skills, the parents quickly come in to learn them themselves because they see the changes that happen in the children. And I'm thrilled that this can be a family event, because just like family meetings you can have, family discussions about the internal world, sharing family time, mindfulness is an opportunity to actually get closer with each other. We're just beginning to do studies on mindfulness interventions with kids, so we don't have the long-term studies yet. But I can tell you in my own practice of teaching mindfulness to my patients that what they tell me about, which is so rewarding to hear about, is that when these kids have learned to know their own internal world, to be able to be present with their own emotions, to learn mindfulness techniques so they can actually bring stability and clarity to their own mind, the course of their life is different. This is for kids who maybe are a little anxious, or kids who have mood issues that are going wild in their lives. The stability and clarity of being able to stay present and let emotions arise and fall without being swept up by them changes everything. If we take these positive outcomes, and this is from experiencing children up close and personal for sometimes years at a time, and seeing how it changed their lives. And we see how, in fact, this may be helpful to kids in general to learn these skills. Then a child who may not know how to understand their own emotions, may not have kindness toward themselves, may not know how to read other people's feelings, this changes the whole course of their life because you're giving them a life skill that helps them move deeply into inner knowing and an inner clarity that we can see is an invitation for meaning and connection, both with oneself and with other people. That gift of mindfulness is a gift that keeps on giving because that child will be able to have relationships with others in their childhood and adolescence. By preparing them before the teenage years, they're going to have a skill that will continue with them. And then when they go on to have their own children, you'll see an outcome of secure attachment that itself may promote these aspects of a mindful life.